Would you be my Mr. Dun 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 dun? I still got a lot of shit to learn.
On the 25th of April 1915, at the break of dawn, thousands of Anzac soldiers landed across the beaches of Gallipoli in Turkey, completely oblivious to what they were about to face. The Gallipoli Campaign would come to be known as one of the world's most infamous military disasters, resulting in over 747 Anzac deaths on the first day, and over 44,000 Allied deaths by the end of the war, around 9,000 of them being Anzacs. Anzac stands for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps and is very well commemorated to this day by both Australians and New Zealanders. You may be asking why these countries celebrate such a disastrous military campaign, and you're right for doing so. Whilst many young men died on those beaches, and whilst many more emotionally died elsewhere, this battle forged the Australian and New Zealand legacy that they share, and separated them from the British Empire. The Gallipoli Campaign gave these countries a name, and allowed them to prove themselves, even though they were both newly formed nations, with Australia being formed in 1901 and New Zealand being formed in 1907. Being an Australian-born person myself, I have great respect for the soldiers that were lost, and great sorrow for the families that never saw their fathers, sons, or brothers ever again. This is why I took the time to make just a brief summary of the Gallipoli Campaign. The reasoning behind the Gallipoli Campaign being launched was because the Allied forces fighting in Belgium and France had considered opening a new front, as the Western Front had grown into a stalemate. When hearing of this possible decision, Grand Duke Nicholas of Russia appealed to Britain to aid them against the Ottoman Empire, who were becoming a larger and larger threat as they had been rapidly expanding their borders. In response, the British and French spearheaded a naval attack against Constantinople, which is Istanbul today, in an attempt to open up the Dardanelles Strait, connecting the Aegean Sea and the Sea of Marmara, which had failed. If the naval attack was successful, supply routes between the Allies and the Russians would have opened up, therefore knocking the Ottomans out of the war. Also, the First Lord of Admiralty, Winston Churchill, had expressed that a new front would force the Germans to split their forces and to withdraw many men from the Western Front, to aid the now crumbling Ottoman Empire. Churchill himself was the one that suggested that the naval bombardments would start on February 19, 1915. A large factor behind the failure of the naval attack was that the minesweepers failed to detect a very large portion of the mines the Ottomans had dispersed within the waters. So when the British and French battleships entered the straits on March 18th that same year, the mines along with a barrage of Ottoman fire had sunk 3 battleships and damaged 3 more. This forced the remaining ships to withdraw, leading to the amphibious ground assault on the Gallipoli Peninsula that would follow on the 25th of April 1915. In command of the assault was General Ian Hamilton, who had British, French, and Anzac forces under his command. The Allies had suffered heavy casualties during the landing of the Aegean coast beachheads. One beach would come to be known as Anzac Cove, as agreed by the Turkish government on 1985, in order to commemorate the Anzac soldiers that fought valiantly despite the steep and rigid terrain, along with heavily armed Ottoman soldiers. Not soon after the landing, the Anzacs were forced to dig in, and trench warfare began to ensue, as it did on the Western Front. The Anzacs dug so much that it eventually gave them the title of diggers, which is still used within the Australian military to describe its soldiers. The Anzacs had found themselves not being able to progress, as trench warfare didn't allow it, so the soldiers were forced to experience harsh summer weather and dysentery epidemics. The build-up of corpses did not help either, as swarms of flies and insects would engulf the bodies, further spreading diseases and illnesses, making the conditions unbearable for the soldiers. An attack on Suvla Bay was ordered by General Hamilton in an attempt to break the stalemate between the Anzacs and the Ottomans. The attack would be carried out by 63,000 Allied forces. A week later, the Allies found themselves in the same stalemate they had intended to get the Anzacs out of, due to horrible commanding and communication from generals and officers. On August 10th, an attack led by Mustafa Kemal successfully retook Suvla Bay. Following this, on August 15th, the commander at Suvla Bay, Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Stopford, was dismissed due to his terrible leadership and going a long period of time with inactivity. By this point in the invasion, Allied casualties increased exponentially, with very few reinforcements available, and the stalemate grew ever more tedious. By now it was time to evacuate the Allied troops, and finally the order was given on the 7th of December, with the final troops evacuated before dawn on the 20th of December 1915. The evacuation was a success, with not a single casualty. It is said that the success of the evacuation is owed to a delayed action device, commonly called a drip rifle, invented by Lance Corporal William Charles Scurry, who was later promoted to Captain Scurry of the 7th Battalion. The device worked by firing a rifle by means of weights, operated through water escaping from one tin into another. A rifle could be left to operate for 20 minutes after the device was set. This contraption was used to deceive the Turks into thinking that trenches were still occupied, while over 80,000 men were evacuated from the peninsula. 6 rifles were left by the 3rd Brigade to fire, following the departure of the last forces in the Gallipoli Peninsula. To sum it all up, the Gallipoli Campaign was a disaster, as the Allies suffered more than 250,000 casualties, whether it was wounded or killed. Gallipoli has become a defining moment for both Australian and New Zealanders, as well as Ottomans, as it laid the foundations for modern Turkey. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.